Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. So before we get into the difference between Obama and that black female on the screen with a sort of mischievous smile, but she seems like a pretty nice person, what have you, let's talk about white culture a little bit to put things in perspective, right? How did we get here? Can we just automatically assume that Obama is superior to that other female or smarter or what have you? And that's all there is to it? Let's talk about this for a second here. Okay. So let's first define the difference between universal culture and white culture in a way that you should be able to understand, that you should want to play for your friends, what have you, or tell them yourself. So let's start with samurai culture here versus universal martial culture, then we'll help you understand the universal concept relative to white culture versus universal culture. So in samurai culture, right, you would judge someone based on a samurai scale, one way or another. Maybe there's more than one scale, but we'll just say there's one scale for the sake of argument, with a samurai scale. Courage, how well they yield a samurai sword, and how well they keep their code. You might say Bushido, whatever it might be. You know, how well they keep up with the culture. Maybe they have some kind of familiarity with the history. With a universal martial scale, you're looking for character. You're looking for the ability to defend oneself, to fight in hand-to-hand combat. You're looking for these things universally in a way that's fair and just and right. And sparring would be the universal way to prove it, because if someone attacks you on the streets, you have to outmaneuver that person. Okay? You can strike them in ways that grappling isn't that practical for, but grappling kind of helps, right? And if you spend too much time trying to be strong or have a grappling body, it can take away from your ability to strike. And the striking is really what's going to prove life or death in the vast majority of situations. Okay. So now, let's now compare the difference between universal culture and white culture. So what is white culture, right? What does America have in common with France and England, the UK, Scotland, Poland, Scandinavia, Russia, Australia, Canada? Okay, what is this white culture? Well, let's talk about it in terms of what's sacred to white culture. Believe it or not, what's sacred in white culture for the most part, right, are things related to Christianity, almost first and foremost, if not first and foremost. Christianity as described by the white man, right? So the Catholic Church, for example, is seen as a bit more professional than at least the vast majority of Orthodox churches, Protestant churches, what have you. Right? They are more formal, and as we see a pattern where you see the businessman tends to be valued more in Western culture than the average person, right, and the poor person. The person at the 5-star restaurant, okay, who goes there more often, tends to be sought after more by, say, females than the person who goes to McDonald's all the time or whatever, right? It's a very shallow scale that they have, but it's there. So they're the way they look at Christianity, right? These richer churches try to make poorer people seem less devout. Now there's some exceptions because it has to do with where the rich people come from. For example, there's a lot of rich people who started off, as poor people, maybe farmers, cowboys, what have you, and then they became rich. So they want those people in their religion to be seen a certain way, and we see that in the movies, right? Sometimes these poor white cultures are seen as very heartfelt, right? Maybe Chuck Norris represents for them to some degree, what have you, historically. Okay. So in Western culture, it's kind of centered around the church. It's a community center, right? They call it Judeo-Christian culture. Instead of saying white culture, they call it Judeo-Christian culture. But how do black people behave in these churches? How do Hispanics? They tend to be in their social clubs, in their church groups to a large degree, and depending on, if these clubs are unofficially white only, right? They're in their college frats, and they uphold a certain white way of speaking, a white scale, white social norms, white cultural norms, white political norms, and we see that that's distinctly white. It's not universal. Christianity isn't, it isn't important to everybody. The vast majority of people on this planet are not Christians, and they're certainly not devout Christians. Okay. There's more to white culture than Christianity, right? There's, football, and if you go to maybe Europe, it's rugby or whatever. There's various sports. Soccer. Okay, most people perceive soccer to have come from Europe. Baseball. They perceive baseball to have come from white people. And I'm no exception to the rule. I'm pretty sure it did. Basketball, strangely enough, is actually said to have come from white people. And so we see the sports, we see the education, we see the fancy marriages, we see the religion, and we see the response to the religion, right? The Age of Enlightenment. Now these things are all in the boundary of white culture. When someone steps outside of white culture, people who are in white culture, especially white people, tend to maybe feel uncomfortable. They tend to kind of frown upon it. They tend to say, well, this is America. Why are you doing this? Why are you dressing this way? I know firsthand, right? When I used to dress like a martial artist all the time as a martial artist. Okay. People used to look at me strange. Some people would say some snide remark. Okay. I made a lot of videos about this. Even in the most liberal places in this country, they weren't comfortable with me dressing as a martial artist, which showed that it projected a certain virtue, a certain character, a certain righteousness that went beyond them. It showed definitively that they're just another person in white culture, token minority, white person, whatever, Jew, LGBT, and I'm this great martial artist. You could tell by my shape, the way I moved, what I was wearing. I happened to wear the Kung Fu outfit. I've done Kung Fu before, but that's not my martial arts style. Okay, I made my own martial art system as somebody very capable of doing so. So at the end of the day, we see that white culture is not very accepting of differences, right? People fear what they don't understand. People in white culture are no exception. When it comes to dating, they try to insist on things. They say, well, what does he do for a living? Or he's weird. Or this or that. Is he a Christian? They're pointing to things in white culture. So I'm going to end my explanation of white culture by saying this. If you had a white female who was, say, blonde, and I'm talking to her, I say, would you deny your faith? Say she was a Christian. Would you deny your faith if the government was persecuting people? She'd probably say one of two things. One, she'd say, no, you don't do that when you're a Christian no matter what, which is the more respectable response, right? Or she might say, well, God knows, and that she's got to live, right? Both of them are basically acceptable in white culture. Some people see it one way, some people see the other. A lot of times people don't like one response or the other. But they're both kind of, common responses to that question. They're both socially acceptable enough. Now, some people very much do not think that you should say no. Some people think that you should say that you would not deny your faith. Okay. And some people say, well, maybe you're right and they're wrong, and they're more kind of diplomatic, or whatever you want to call it. Or you might say to a fault. Now, in white culture, the rule of thumb here is that if it's something that's more sacred to white people than the government telling them what to do for the purpose of reinforcing whiteness. For example, if it's some rich white people saying they want them to deny their faith to make a multicultural society or something, even in a white manner. A lot of white people say no, because that is more sacred to white culture than following the governing class. That gets a little bit tricky there. They would expect that person to say, no, I'm not going to give up my, in that case for that person, whiteness. In that very profound level of it, perhaps. Maybe not profound, but we'll get to that. We'll get to why whiteness ruins religion, either later in this video or in another video. But they'd expect that person to stand firm for whiteness. It's like they're saying, hey, be proud to be what you are, or whatever. And that's key here. Okay? Because whiteness includes a certain fanatic insistence on whiteness, generally speaking. When somebody is white, generally speaking, in the vast majority of cases, they're not capable of switching over to universal thinking. So like the Jews in the Bible, the masses of them were seen as completely in rebellion, failures. Isaiah went on about it, John the Baptist, Jesus, you name it, Stephen the Martyr. So it is when we're talking about Christianity and white people. The vast majority of them are seen as out of touch with reality, and that kind of spread to their church system. We see all these denominations, 20,000 denominations in America, 50,000 or so in the world, is what people are saying. Now, a lot of them say that they're right and everyone else is wrong, because it's also part of white culture to think that most white people are out of touch, and there's a small group of white people that get it, right? Thus we get these sayings, people suck, life's a B word, and then you die, and so on and so forth, right? It's a rat race, it's a dog-eat-dog culture, it's a corrupt society, right? The rotten apple, Sin City, what have you. So part of white culture is to know that white culture is corrupt, and that the vast majority of white people, at least, are very mistaken when it comes to life. It's a crazy world out there, and most people in America, at least, are white. They're either white or clearly whitewashed, or responding to white and whitewashed people in a way that is what white people planned for them. They canceled some cultures, they kept some cultures to play out other races, for example, what have you. And certain types of white people are poor. So we have to consider this when we consider the difference between Obama, who's superimposed on the ideal man, which is me. It's right there in the wordplay of his name. Oba is like another way for saying Obi in Igbo culture. And Obi is Igbo spelled backwards. Oba means king, Igbo means king. Igbo means king, Obi means king, Oba means king. Obi means king, heart, hut, essence, scepter, temple, core. In fact, in a sense, Igbo ironically does mean king in a sense. It means the king of all the tribes on the planet, all the races, what have you. No offense to anybody, but that's how you would interpret this wordplay that the West itself partakes in. That's a more complex issue on that thing. That it's a long description for another day. But to make a long story short, Obama, right? Oba meaning king, and M-A meaning martial arts, or A-M scramble. Who are you? I am who I am. What God said to Moses, go tell the Jews that I am who I am, and I am who I am has sent me to you. Who I am and why God made me who I am, and so on and so forth, right? Who, when, where, how, why, has sent me to you to say God wants you to follow me, and you should have the logic to understand that. It's also why Christ is a character in the story in Luke 12:57 says to these people, right? He said to the Jews. He may as well said it to the Gentiles at the same time. He's like, why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? Because the masses of the Jews, and I'm going to make a video about this today if I have time, they don't reason very well. They're not very good at critical thinking. It's hard to tell the difference between the modern Jew and the Jew back then. But these Jews today, as a group, generally speaking, like most people, right? Like the vast majority of peoples on the planet, they're not very good at using reason and following through. Saying this is what's right, this is what's wrong, and I'm going to follow through. So if you truly judge what is right, and you judge it correctly and effectively, with wisdom and insight and sense, you're going to do what is right. So he says, why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? AKA, why don't you do what is right as a result of judging correctly what is right and having that mental clarity to follow through, that good judgment to follow through. So they weren't good at that. So when we look at Obama versus that female, they're both Western superimpositions. That female is probably a crypto Jew superimposed on the Jew who in Western culture, whether it be the Klan or the Nazis, they got that from the core Western culture. The kind of scruffy looking Jew in Western culture is said to be inferior to the kind of Nordic white guy. That's still part of the culture. Okay? When Donald Trump, with all the ridicule he receives, is he this tall, quote-unquote, handsome Englishman? No. He's a scruffy guy. Why was Gavin Newsom elected the the governor of California? Because he's more like an English person. We even had a mayor in San Francisco called London Breed. They're like, that's the game they're playing. Pretty straightforward. The Nordic, English, right? German. That is the model they push, and it's English and German centric. Doubt it not. So he actually does have better judgment than that female, I'd imagine. And he's more well-spoken, what have you. But he accepts the boundaries of white culture. And that is critical. That's a critical idea. Therefore, you can tell immediately that when you see my martial art picture, my best martial art picture, before it was edited, even after, because you should be able to factor in that they edit pictures and try to make certain people look superior. They try to make Obama look magically superior to me. And you should be able to see through that a mile away. A mile away. If you can't, you are dumb. When you think about the word estimate has the word mate in it. Whether you're saying, hey, what would women think of this guy over here if you're a straight guy? Or do I think of that female over there, again, if you're a straight guy, for example? You should be able to estimate to a certain degree, right? Or you're an idiot, right? You should be able to say that, hey, fat bastard from Austin Powers, and Austin Powers, to the average white female, looks less attractive than Brad Pitt in his best picture. Right? No brainer, universal. But when you're white, using a white culture, you're likely to say, hey, the most handsome guy that ever lived was a mulatto guy with a universal scale is not as handsome as, say, Austin Powers or something, because you're a dumb fuck. And you'd rather marry Austin Powers, that actor, what have you, than the Son of God, because you're limited by that white scale. Or maybe you're one of those people who say, well, he's handsome for a black guy, so they're about even. Or, well, he's technically more handsome, but I want people to think I like, these white kind of expectations that accompany white social norms, what have you, that accompany the same spirit, we'll say, they're in the same spirit. The same way of thinking, the same mentality. They would cause you to say stupid things like that. And so when we compare people, when we look at this case and say, well, why was I shunned for 7 years and counting? Over 7 years. Why are females shunning me? Because of the social engineering, right? Francis Galton, who coined the term eugenics, was a Freemason. He also was big on probability and statistics. For example, hereditary traits, right? His cousin was Charles Darwin. He was very much interested in who breeds with who and why, and how to use the agencies of social control to control who breeds who and why. That's why the most powerful social club in the world is said to be the Club of Rome. And one of the most popular dating sites in the last 10, 15 years, whatever, was OkCupid, who is a Roman deity of love. And the Freemasons and the government, they're modeled after Greco-Roman culture. And we see Miller's speech the other day at Charlie Kirk's memorial, where he cites their roots are in Athens and Rome. He didn't say France or Germany. He didn't say Greece. He did say Greece. He didn't say Ireland. He said Athens and Rome. And that has to do with pagan culture and white culture and these Greek frats in college. So we have to consider these things when we estimate. Is a female smart enough to use a universal scale, or is she a racist bitch because she's not smart enough to see where the line is? The line is pretty clear. If you would rather date someone other than Jesus because he is part black, and you end up with Austin Powers or Fat Bastard, or Lord forbid, someone more like George Bush or something, then you are a dumb bitch. If you say you won't deny your faith if the government pressed you, but you would reject Jesus on a date, my goodness, you're a dumb fucking bitch. And what do you think Christianity is about? A PR lift for white people? Are you that fucking shallow? Are you that dull? Are you that pathetic? Are your genes that fucking inferior? Come on. I expect better from a retard. So when we estimate the mate and the marriage, we're first and foremost looking for character, which requires believing in and living a universal scale. Not a white scale or any other racial scale, but a universal scale. Now see the beginning of this video again if you need to understand that. But one of the main reasons I made this video, I'm going to wrap this up real quickly. I went over time. I want you to understand that when you see that black chick having no problem getting a date in a society, in a liberal society, where there's feminists everywhere who have a liberal attitude toward dating, right? Date people are different, right? A lot of them. And you see a person who looks far more logical and responsible and smart and moral. The real life version, not the white social norm wash, like I brought up earlier, which is what Obama and this female are. But the real life version, but that too. At least, perhaps that too, we'll say. That's a more complex issue, how to judge these people who have accepted the white social norm boundaries. Okay. You know that something is very wrong. Something is very wrong when the person with the most mental clarity, even after them fuming and poisoning him, who's determined to do what's right while everyone else is selling out, sucking a white social norm dick, when he's shunned in like the most liberal region on the planet, California, the fourth biggest economy, rich females everywhere, rich, poor. Some people date homeless people, some people date only rich people. There's all kinds of people being dated here, and I'm shunned by attractive females. And some are poor people that date poor people. You know the culture has fucking failed. And if you need any more evidence than that a universal scale is superior, which you should know already, then you are a dumb, stupid, dumb fucking dumbass, retarded, dumb fucking fuck.